All right, and welcome back to Nick Sibicky's Music Production Secrets. We're continuing our discussion on acoustics and perception of sound. Today I want to introduce this concept to you of how we actually perceive frequencies. And I put this chart up here. We'll get to this in a moment. But first, I want to talk just a little bit about what a frequency is. We've already covered this in a video before, but how we perceive it. So basically, we have a molecule, right, and it's going to vibrate or basically hit the next molecule. And maybe something else moves this molecule again, and it's going to hit that molecule, and it's going to move this molecule again and move this molecule. In other words, it's how often does this molecule move? If it keeps getting hit over and over and over and over again, similar to like how you might think like a string inside the piano goes back and forth, right? So the air molecules around here are going to, keep getting hit as the string swings back and forth, right, repeatedly, just bam, 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 bam. If this happens at a slow speed, it's going to be a very low frequency. And if it happens at a very fast speed, if the string vibrates back and forth very quickly, it's going to happen at a very high frequency. And guitar players know this because you can actually see your low strings on the guitar vibrate back and forth. You know, if they're the really lowest ones, you can almost make them out going back and forth. You know, they're still going really fast, but it's like you can almost see them. Whereas the high strings are just super fast. I mean, especially when you go up the fretboard and it's like you don't even see it moving, really. So keep this in mind, okay, this idea of high and low frequency. And this corresponds with how we hear notes or pitches. And low pitch will swing back and forth at a low speed, and a high pitch will swing back and forth at a high speed. And my vocal cords can do the same thing. If I talk like this, I'm moving back and forth maybe at 100, my vocal cords, that is, are moving back and forth maybe at 100 times a second. Whereas if I talk like this, they're moving back and forth probably like 300 times a second. So that's a pretty big difference down here, right? But we perceive it very differently. Okay, so you understand low and high frequencies. Well, here's the thing you maybe didn't know, or at least don't know up until now. Humans, and that means you, do not perceive of all frequencies the same. In fact, we hear our frequencies very differently, nor do we hear all frequencies. Let's change the color here. In general, and this is important, this is a number you're going to see time and time again, we're going to estimate that humans can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And again, hertz means a cycle a second. Okay, so this is your limit. And in reality, this 20,000 hertz is really outside the human hearing range of most people. And I can't speak English anymore. In order for us to hear 20 hertz, it's got to be pretty loud. I mean, 20 hertz is really, we're going to feel it more than we hear it. This is the kind of sound when you go to a movie theater and hear a movie and it shakes your butt and you go, oh, you know, it's a big explosion. That's a sound you're actually feeling more than you're hearing, right? These really low frequencies. Okay, so this is the range, approximate range that we hear. But again, you know, if you are over the age of, you know, maybe 16 to 18, I very much doubt you're hearing up to 20,000 hertz anymore, especially if you live in a modernized society with a lot of noise and traffic and things like that. And, you know, just to give you an example, my grandmother, before she passed away, I gave her a quick hearing test, and she really didn't hear anything above 6 kilohertz. And so the older you get, of course, the top end of your hearing range really starts to diminish. And you know, this is a part of aging. So why from here to here? What does that mean when we can hear from here to here? Well, it has to do with how the ear works. And basically, you know, the ear is still kind of a mysterious place as far as science is concerned. Like, we have a pretty good idea, but there's still a lot of little mysteries within it. So if you're interested in acoustics and medicine, the field of audiology is you know, I think really cool and still could use a lot more research if you're interested in that sort of stuff. But here's the basic idea, and this is, I'm going to take some shortcuts here to explain it. But the idea is that inside your eardrum, right, you have your eardrum, so you have this membrane. This actually, the sound's going to hit, and it's going to vibrate this membrane, and this is actually going to move a few bones that are then basically going to pound against this fluid-filled sac. And it looks like a spiral kind of sac, something like this. And this sac is lined with little tiny hairs, and each of these hairs is connected to your nervous system, and it's going to trigger when it vibrates, essentially. And so these vibrations from this tympanic membrane being sort of amplified through these bones These are the three smallest bones in the human body. You might have learned this in anatomy class at some point in life. And it's basically just going to pound on the end of this, sending a shock wave through your cochlea. And depending on how far the shock wave gets, will determine which hairs basically get to hear it. And how far it gets is actually also determined not just by amplitude, but also by its frequency. And lower frequencies will travel further than high frequencies, essentially. So we have all these different hairs, and essentially they're tuned. And tuning is not necessarily how you tune an instrument, but they're basically, each hair will be more sensitive to a certain frequency region than other hairs. And we have a lot more of these hairs in the frequency region, basically between about 2 to 5,000 hertz. Hairs, we have a lot of hairs that are sensitive between 2 and 5,000 hertz. And this region is basically like when you think of like fingernails on a chalkboard or babies crying. Baby really isn't that loud. Babies actually, think it's like the size of a football. I mean, how loud can it be? It sounds really loud, right? And the reason is because babies are really good at making sound between 2 and 5,000 hertz. Okay, this is where you have the most hair. And again, from an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense, right? That, if you have a baby and if it doesn't cry, if it doesn't make a sound where you're most sensitive, you're not going to take care of it. It's not going to be annoying. You're not going to hear it. You'll just let it starve in the jungle. But if you, make the sound that's the most annoying, that humans are most sensitive to, and you keep doing it, yeah, the human's going to come over and take care of you, okay? So there you go. There's your most sensitive region. We have very few of these hairs that respond to anything really below 100 hertz. So 100 hertz, we'll get fewer and fewer. And this is, you guys know this if you've ever played a musical instrument. And I actually should do this right now, but I don't have my keyboard hooked up. But yeah, I wish I did now. Okay, let me pause for a second and, well, let me tell you what it is, and then I'll pause for a second. I'll demonstrate. Your ear just has very few hairs down here around 100 hertz and below. So we tend to feel these frequencies more than hear them because they have to be so loud for us to hear them. And at the same time, our resolution is pretty bad. So as I was saying, if you played a musical instrument before, it's very easy to tell the pitch of a high instrument. But if you play bass, it kind of sounds, it's actually very difficult to sing it back. It's very easy if someone plays you a melody on a piano, you can go, do, re, mi, you can sing it back. But if you hear low frequencies, it takes a while for your ear to register what note that actually was. Okay, so I want to do a little experiment. I'm going to close this just for a second. All right, so I got my keyboard loaded up here. And what I'm going to demonstrate is I'm going to play you a C major chord. This is as basic of a nice piano sonority as you can get. There it is. You guys hear that nice, beautiful C major chord, I hope? I can turn up a little bit more, maybe. Let's try that. All right, so that should sound pretty good, right? And really, these are actually three fundamental frequencies and what we call a bunch of overtones above them. But for right now, just know these are three frequencies that really get along pretty well and sound pretty good. It's not like I went over there to you and tried to play something like this, right? Those clash against our ears, but these three get along, okay? And we can talk about why in a later video, but just know that. And so if I go up, so right now here's one frequency is about 250 hertz. One is about 1.5 times that, whatever that is, 375, I guess, and one's sort of in between. Okay, so I have 250 hertz and a little above it. Here's the same thing at 500 hertz. Sounds pretty good, right? Here's the same thing at 1,000 hertz. It is piercing. It's very pure, but it doesn't sound bad. I can go up to 2,000 hertz, and that's kind of the limit as far as how high a piano can go, so I really can't go higher, but it still doesn't sound bad, right? It's kind of nice. Let's go down, though. So here's our 250 hertz. Same chord, now it's at 125 hertz. I'm getting close to that 100 hertz limit where my resolution starts to really, really wear off. You can see it's still a nice chord, but it's starting to get a little more grating. It's starting to not sound quite as nice. And as I go to the next one, you'll really be able to tell. Ah, there we go. That's the one I'm looking for. So this is around 60 hertz. And you see, it's the same chord. It should sound nice and pretty like all the other ones. But does it? No! It sounds like garbage. And again, the reason isn't because the piano's bad or the piano's wrong. It has to do with the fact that we do not hear well under 100 hertz. It's our ear that doesn't have enough resolution. This should sound good, or at least pleasing to the ear if we go by all the other versions of it. It's the same chord, same exact configuration, just down an octave, or an octave too far. I can go lower too. Here's the last one. Here's one, the same relationship, same chord, but it just starts at about 35 hertz. It sounds almost like a horror movie now, right? This chord versus this chord, right? This is nice, same chord, terrible. And again, it's just because where am I putting this chord, these notes, inside of the frequency spectrum? If I put them up higher, sounds nice. If I put them down low, our ear can't actually handle it. It's actually too complex for our ear. So this is why low frequencies are such a big deal when you're mixing and recording. You have to be very, very careful of them because it's very easy to overload the ear and make your entire mix sound like garbage. Okay, so if you understand that, let's move on to this chart over here that I loaded so long ago that you've probably been staring at for the last 10 minutes. And take a look at it. This is what we call the Fletcher-Munson equal loudness contour. I'm just going to abbreviate Fletcher. Let me use my pen actually here. Here we go. Fletcher-Munson equal loudness contour, or FOMELC. No one actually ever calls it FOMELC. Don't call it FOMELC. That's stupid. Okay, but Fletcher-Munson equal loudness contour, or just Fletcher-Munson for short, or equal loudness, don't care. And how this works is this actually shows you how sensitive you are to each frequency region. But here's the surprise. This is what Fletcher and Munson found out, is that how sensitive you are to each of these different frequencies, high notes and low notes, is sort of dependent on how loud it is to begin with. And this is surprising, right? You think, okay, well, I just don't hear low frequencies well. Well, the thing is, you don't hear low frequencies at quiet volumes nearly as well as low frequencies at louder volumes. And this is the discovery that Fletcher and Munson made in doing these acoustic tests and psychoacoustic research. It tends to, as all sounds get louder is up way on this graph, right? Here's sound pressure level. Sounds get louder. The difference between low frequencies and high frequencies what did I just do? There we go. Tends to actually flatten out over time. And you can kind of see that as it's getting louder and louder. You can see that this top line is actually flatter. I mean, it still has this big bump here, but overall is much flatter than this line. Right? This one goes way off the chart and then way down and then bump and then up. It's actually going to really matter in the low frequency region, where low frequencies we hear much better the louder they are, comparatively. So a couple things to take away from this chart. Number one, if you guys remember the baby crying idea, if you guys look between about 2,000 hertz and about, actually a little over 5,000 hertz right there, you can see this little bump, right, basically across the board, right? Those are the frequencies we're most sensitive to. And at least in terms of sound pressure level, right, we can actually hear lower than 0 decibels. Don't ask why you can hear lower than 0 decibels. This is entirely relative. It doesn't actually mean anything. Well, it does mean, but it's relative. Keep that in mind. So we can hear below the 0 decibels if it's between 2,000 and 5,000 hertz. Whereas the same sound, if it was, instead of being at 4,000 hertz, was at 20 hertz, basically it would need to be almost 80 decibels, actually probably more than 80 decibels, louder in order for us just to hear it. So a sound at 4,000 hertz, when we can hear that, the same sound at 20 hertz needs to be 80 decibels louder, and 80 decibels is a lot. We're talking, major difference in terms of sound output. And this is why low frequencies will shake your booty, okay? Because in order for us to hear them, we have to turn them up way, way, way loud. And so because the sound is so loud, right, we know loudness is the amount of molecule displacement. The further the molecule displaces, the more we are able to feel it. Okay, so low frequencies have to be really, really loud in order for us to hear them. And thus the byproduct means also we feel low frequencies. You can feel really high frequencies too, but man, it's kind of annoying, quite frankly, because number one, the sound has to be really loud, so it'll sound really loud to us, so we really don't want to be around high frequencies because it'll hurt, it'll cause pain in our eardrums. But second, if you ever had a really high frequency vibrate you, it's nowhere near as pleasing. It feels very aggressive. It's kind of, it's just like numbing. Low frequencies are ones like, because they're going slower and your body can almost take it in, but I don't know, high frequencies are kind of painful. Okay, so one other last takeaway before we end this part of the lesson. If you are working on a mix, and here's the secret, and veteran engineers know the secret really well, either just by having this lesson before or by experience. If you mix something at a very quiet amplitude level versus, oops, not that. No, I want to change my color, and I was trying to do it gently. It didn't work. Versus something at a very loud amplitude level, you can see that your ear will respond differently, right? The distance between medium frequencies and low frequencies will be much greater in the low frequency version than in the high frequency, in the low amplitude version versus the high amplitude version. So if you're mixing at a quiet volume, what you're actually going to do is you're going to overmix the bass. You're going to turn up the bass too much in order to compensate. And if you mix at a really high volume level, you're actually probably not going to turn up the bass enough, right? The bass will be there present. But whenever someone goes and takes your mix and puts it through, a quiet set of speakers, there'll be no bass in it. It'll just be missing. Okay, so again, our ear does not hear all frequencies evenly, and nor does it hear all frequencies evenly even if they're, or let's say it doesn't hear them differently at different volume levels either, which is the other strange part. So if you're, again, the pro tip here, if you're mixing at a quiet volume level, you're very likely to overmix the bass. And if you're mixing at a very loud volume level, you're very likely to undermix the bass. So make sure when you're mixing and working on music, you're listening back and testing it at various amplitudes, at various volumes. Otherwise, your mix, as soon as you change the volume, it'll sound way out of whack and out of balance. All right, in the next video, we'll talk about, what are we going to talk about? I had a plan. I totally forgot about it. Well, I'll figure that out. Come back to the next video and find out what we're going to talk about.